then suddenly there's a woman there. What's she doing? They just comment on this. And maybe there's very strong comments on, we see Boaz's, his moral character so strongly at this point on so many levels. Obviously on the level that he's not going to do anything inappropriate alone here with a woman in the fields. And well, we can say, well, I mean, obviously we wouldn't expect that from him. But that he had such control and mastery of himself that instead of being angry at her, shocked and upset with her chutzpah, audacity, when are you coming, accosting me in the middle of the night in my field? What are you thinking? Who are you? What are you doing this for? He was so kind and compassionate and gentle. He's blessing her. The sages say any normal person would have cursed her. He's telling her, I'm going to take care. And the sages say this shows what type of person he was. So we are in the middle of chapter 3. And we are at this point where, if you remember the story, Ruth has spent 3 months in the fields of Boaz. And Boaz was very nice to her in the beginning. He gave her all this extra privileges and kindnesses and told his workers to like sort of drop extra sheaves for her, said she could use their water, said she could stay with the maidens that were doing the work there, which some interpret that she actually lived there for 3 months with those women. Some say no, she went back. She just hung out with the women. Others were saying more safe area for the time, but she was there for 3 months. And Naomi, maybe Rose, but for sure Naomi was really hoping, now that Boaz knew of her existence and obviously felt favorably inclined, that he would present himself in marriage as the redeeming relative, which we were supposed to talk about today. But he didn't. 3 months pass, the barley harvest is over, the wheat harvest is over, she goes back home, and no Boaz proposition suitor knocking on her door. And Naomi's like, we got to do something, because if we don't like take matters into our own hands and do something, this is it. It's over. We're done. So she comes up with this very non-conventional idea of Ruth going to Boaz personally and begging him to be this redeemer for her. And we discussed last week that this was so out of Ruth's box, that she was this like paragon of modesty. Sometimes that's the point, that service of God, if it's really pure, it's not only in our boxes, even if those are very good boxes. And she said, okay, it makes no sense to me, but I'm nullified to you, Naomi. I'm listening to you absolutely. Naomi said, don't worry, you'll be dressed in all of my merits, all of my merits, all of your merits. They will protect you. They will dress you. They will enclose you. This will succeed. And that's sort of exactly what we're up to, is that she comes to the field and she did exactly what Naomi told her. Naomi gave her sort of specific directions and then stop. Go, see where he's lying down, and just lie at his feet. And that's what she did. And then she didn't know what else to do. So she just waited. I'm sure she was probably praying every minute as she was waiting. And then this is what we're up to. In the middle of the night, the man was startled and he turned around. He was sleeping and suddenly sees a woman lying at his feet. He was like, whoa, like, is this an apparition? Is this a shindalit? Is this a human? Why is this woman here? He's all alone, doing this very, as we said, didn't really make sense thing to do. He's guarding his harvest, which again also was so strange. He's 80 years old. He's a very wealthy man. He rarely was in the fields at all. Okay, now it's a final culmination of the harvest, but he's spending the night in the field to guard his harvest. That's so clearly hand of God, because it made no sense. As sometimes we do things and we wonder, it didn't make any sense. So that like made no sense. But then suddenly there's a woman there. What's she doing? They just comment on this. And maybe there's very strong comments on, we see Boaz's saintliness, his moral character so strongly at this point on so many levels. Obviously on the level that he's not going to do anything inappropriate alone here with a woman in the fields. And well, we can say, well, I mean, obviously we wouldn't expect that from him. But that he had such control and mastery of himself that instead of being angry at her, shocked and upset with her chutzpah, audacity, when are you coming, accosting me in the middle of the night in my field? What are you thinking? Who are you? What are you doing this for? He was so kind and compassionate and gentle. He's blessing her. The sages say any normal person would have cursed her. He's blessing her. He's telling her, I'm going to take care. And the sages say this shows what type of person he was. Because that control of self, like we were just discussing, mind over heart, to not be upset, to not turn to this how dare you do this and come to me in the middle of the night, and instead have the compassion for her. That mind over heart control really shows the moral fiber, who Boaz was. So the verse continues, who are you? He asked. And she answered, I'm your handmaiden Ruth. Spread your robe over your handmaiden, for you are a redeemer. Now, what she meant by this, what does mean you are the redeemer? Spread your robe over me, you're the redeemer. So there's many, many dimensions. There's spiritual, mystical dimensions. But what she's saying is, you're the redeemer, meaning I am the widow of your cousin, Machlon. I need now a double redemption. What's the double redemption I need? You're the redeemer. Why are you the redeemer? Because I think you're the closest male relative. You're my deceased husband's cousin, and obviously it was a very small family. I need redemption for my lands. I need redemption for his soul. What do I mean by redemption for his lands? Well, Naomi and Ruth, we said, were so poor, they literally left Moab without even shoes on their feet. They were so poor. They were so poor that Ruth was in the field gathering what the poor are allowed to gather. But at the same time, they're money poor, but land rich, because Elimelech had all these ancestral lands. Elimelech was a very wealthy man. He had the lands, but the lands had been abandoned for 10 years. They'd been in Moab for 10 years. No one had stolen the lands from them. Everyone knew they were Elimelech's lands. But there was a drought anyway, and they lay barren for all these years. So we have the land. Nothing's growing on the land. We can't eat off the land. But we have the land, but we don't have any money. So we need to sell our land. If we sell our land, we could survive. But you don't just want to put your land up for the auction and lose your land. Of course, if you remember the laws, every Jubilee year you get it back. But in those days, again, maybe it's a little hard for us to relate to because we don't have ancestral lands. And we buy houses and we sell houses. And, of course, it's not so easy then. And maybe we get emotionally tied to our house, but still. But this is our land. So we're not just supposed to sell our land to anybody that will want to buy it. Ideally, you want to sell it to someone in the same male family. Because again, this is all the male line. Land is the male line. So you are a redeemer for that land. You could buy that land from me. You're very wealthy. And it's in your family, meaning your father and my father-in-law were brothers. So that land originally belonged to your grandfather. It was your grandfather's land, of which some went to your father, some went to another brother, some went to my deceased father-in-law. That's the land. So it's your family's land. So again, it wasn't mandatory. If no redeeming relative wanted to buy it, she could have sold it on the market. But ideally, spiritually, we want to keep the land in the family. So you're the redeemer of the land. Will you buy this land from me? Because we need to sell it, but we'd like to sell it to a male relative. And I also need another type of redemption. Will you marry me? Why do I need that redemption? Because we're told that when someone passes away childless, their soul is not at rest. And if a child could be born, that child would in a certain mystical way continue my husband Machlon's life. The etymology of Machlon is mechila, forgiveness. What was his forgiveness? He abandoned Israel. He abandoned his people. He spent 10 years married a Moabite princess who happened to be Ruth, but he didn't know that. But if we can do this marriage, if we can produce a child, that's mechila. There'll be a forgiveness for his soul. His soul will be at peace because his soul on a certain level will continue with this child. So would you like to redeem my lands? And would you like to redeem me? Would you like to redeem my deceased husband and marry me? That was what she was asking him. And again, there's many other layers going on here. Esoterically, she's speaking of the Davidic line that's coming from the two of them. There's lots of things, but this is really what she's saying on the most simple level. And he said, be blessed of God, my daughter. You have made your latest act of kindness greater than the first, and that you've not gone after the younger men, be they poor or rich. So what he's basically telling her is, I'm so impressed. You should be so blessed because what you're doing is so special, so unusual. Like we see in the past, it's interesting. Like we have these other crazy stories, as we mentioned, in creating ultimately the Davidic line, the line of Mashiach, of the Redeemer. We have Lot and his daughters doing this incestuous, horrible act, but that was actually putting this intense energy into the nation of Moab, which Ruth extracted, feeding it into the line of David, the line of redemption, line of Mashiach. We also have, of course, the story of Yehuda and Tamar. Now, Yehuda and Tamar, no one's doing anything wrong there, as the sages explain it, but still, there's a lot of ways it doesn't look right. But also, that was pulling forth this tremendous energy from Tamar, from Yehuda, to be invested ultimately in Boaz, to through Boaz, Yehuda and Tamar, through Ruth, Lot and his daughters, but all of this energy now to converge in another story that might not look so good either, but obviously, unlike with Lot and his daughters, which was completely taboo, is completely kosher. And even unlike with Yehuda and Tamar, where there's innuendos here, Baruch Hashem, here we don't have those either. But as we'll learn, people make up stories, and there were a lot of people talking and saying there was a lot of forbidden stuff going on. But truly here, there wasn't at all, on any level. So why is Boaz saying she's so amazing and this kindness is better than the first and all that stuff? What did he mean? He was saying, listen, Naomi, I know you're an amazing person. We all know that. Because you didn't abandon your mother-in-law. That was a tremendous kindness you did. In a sense, you didn't abandon God. That was a tremendous kindness you did. Your conversion, your complete authenticity of the conversion that happened 10 years prior was a tremendous kindness. You could have gone back to the palace. You're sticking with Naomi, otherwise she would be completely alone. She would have been in the fields collecting those foods, those sheaves, if you weren't with her and taking care of her and going out every day and bringing her back the food, that she didn't have to degrade herself and do that. She's alone. She doesn't have a husband. She doesn't have children. She'd have no one. You've shown her tremendous kindness. But I'm even more impressed by this kindness here. Why? Boaz said, it's so unusual what you're doing. You're a beautiful woman. She wasn't a little girl. She was 40. But he was 80. He was a very old man. And you're choosing to marry an 80-year-old man to help your deceased husband's soul? That's beyond. I'm so impressed. Because generally, you don't want to marry a young man, younger. Marry someone in his 40s or 50. You can have a lifetime together. You can live together for the next 30 years. I mean, what are you going to have with me? Yeah, people could say, oh, well, Boaz is very wealthy. So what? A woman would rather marry a poor man that's going to stick around to be her husband than a rich man that's going to die. So the fact that you're choosing to forgo what nature would assume you should do, and again, you're a beautiful woman, you could find a husband, a good husband, and maybe rich, maybe poor, but someone that would be with you by your side for the next 30 years. And you're giving all that up to help the soul of your deceased husband? Wow. God has to bless you so much for this, because this is so, so unbelievable. This is so beyond what could ever be expected. And then he says to her, and now, my daughter, do not fear. Whatever you say, I will do for you. For all the men in the gate of my people know that you are a worthy woman. I know what you're asking from me. You're probably like really nervous. Am I going to say yes? Am I going to say no? Am I going to say yes? Am I going to say no? Don't worry. I am going to do it. Well, I'm really not, because he's going to go on to say, but I'm not really the closest redeemer. So we should really turn to the closest redeemer, not me. So he knows that him saying that could be like often when we ask something from somebody and they're like, I'd love to help you, but that means like, go fly a kite. Like, no. So Boaz understands that what he's about to tell her, but there is a closer redeemer. And if you want to do this properly, you go to the closest redeemer, and she'll probably take as like, okay, yeah, whatever. He spoke nice, but he didn't mean anything. So that's why before he gets into the practical details of saying, but I'm not the closest redeemer, so really there's someone else you should go to first, and we got to deal with him, and hopefully he will do the act of redemption. He first is giving her this very strong encouragement. Whatever you want, I'm going to do. Don't worry. I'm not just pushing off with nice words. I will take care of you. Practically speaking, I'm not the closest redeemer. I don't know that I'm going to redeem your lands. I don't know that I'm going to marry you because someone else is in line before me. And if we're doing this for the strict legal and spiritual gains, we got to go in order. And I'm not the first one, because as we've explained, Elimelech was one of 3 brothers. Boaz was the son of Solomon, who was deceased by now. There was another living brother, though, Tuv. So Elimelech, Tuv, and Solomon. Elimelech, we know, passed away. Solomon passed away. Tuv's around. And there's Boaz, Solomon's son, Machlon's cousin. So I'm Machlon's cousin, but Tuv is his uncle. He's closer in line than I am. So I'm not trying to blow you off. I'm not trying to speak nice and do nothing, but we've got to present this to Tuv first. He's the uncle. He's closer in line than me. I'm only the cousin. And really, he should redeem the land. He should redeem Machlon's soul. And if he agrees, he goes first. If he doesn't agree, I'll take care of it. Now, of course, we're a little over time, but just to conclude, to understand what's happening here and the difficulties, which we will discuss at length next week, this was not a simple thing Boaz was agreeing to. Because at this point in the history of the Jewish people, we're about 300 years after the Jews entered Israel, after the Jews got the Torah, and some seemingly not so used, didn't happen so often, became obsolete pieces, so to speak, have been forgotten. And one of the critical details that were forgotten was this nuance, very unique only in this law, about the prohibition of marrying a convert from Moab and Ammon. Meaning, we see in the Torah, for example, with Egypt, with Mitzrayim, if someone's from Egypt, I mean, not like Egypt nowadays, but an authentic, original Mitzri, and converts, is a sincere ger, that's beautiful. We accept a convert from Mitzrayim, we accept a convert from anywhere. But he can't marry a Jew. He could only marry another convert. And his children, born Jewish, cannot marry a Jew. They can only marry another convert. And their children can marry Jews. It takes 3 generations for the Mitzri convert to be able to marry regular Jews. And that's any Mitzri, man or woman, based on how Mitzrayim treated us when we were there. So there's a seemingly similar, but not exactly, prohibition with Ammon and Moab. Except it doesn't give the 3-generation rule. It just says you can't marry someone from Ammon or Moab. Eliza?
Would you just go over how it's 3 generations? Somehow I'm getting 4 generations.
The Mitzri, ger, his child, his grandchild. That's the 3rd generation.
So the grandchild can, or the next child?
No, the grandchild can.
The grandchild. Okay, got it. Thank you.
But by Ammon and Moab, we don't see this 3-generation rule. It just says, no, can't marry a Jew. And again, we're not talking about non-Jews, because obviously no non-Jew can marry a Jew. We're talking about a sincere, kosher convert. Totally Orthodox religious convert. We accept you as a Jew, but can't marry a Jew. Why not? Well, the Torah explains why not. Because when we were leaving and we needed you, you weren't there for us. You didn't come out to greet us. You didn't give us the water we needed. So no, you treated us so harshly, so miserably, you cannot marry a Jew. Now, the original law as given to Moshe was that this verse only refers to male converts from Moab and Ammon for a very simple reason. Because we wouldn't expect the woman to be standing outside and giving us food and water. That wouldn't be modest. So they weren't at fault. The men were at fault. So that was the original law. That's how Moshe taught it 300 years ago. But the law hadn't really been practiced for some 300 years because there weren't converts from Moab and Ammon. Moab and Ammon were generally the enemies of the Jewish people. So they didn't really produce converts. So after 300 years of not really putting the rule into practice, people forgot and assumed, just like there's no gender differentiation in terms of a convert from Egypt that can only be married on 3 generations, there's also no gender differentiation, and you can't marry a convert from over Ammon. They're Jewish, they're 100% Jewish. Treat them as a Jew, respect them, love them, treat them wonderfully, but you can't marry them. But the original law was, it's only talking about the men. Because we wouldn't expect the women to go out in the fields and greet us and give us all that water. But the people have forgotten this one. So therefore, to be continued, we'll discuss this next week. But therefore, when Boaz is saying to Ruth, never mind that he had such control over himself that he wasn't shocked and appalled and angry by her audacity and coming and accosting him in the middle of the night, lying at his feet, and oh my God, what are you doing to me here? But you're an apparition, not human. You terrified me. You're following me. You're spying on me. You're. How did you even know I was in the field? Like, this whole total self-control, total compassion, but not just that. He's like, I'm going to walk the rope for you. I'm going to take care of this. It's to take care of. It's not simple because, someone really don't want to marry you. That's what Jared was going to say. Are we allowed to marry her? She's a convert from Moab. Yes, Machlon did marry her, and yes, she's a true convert. No question on that. But you're not supposed to marry a convert from Moab. And Boaz, as the head of the Sanhedrin, is going to stand up for her and say, no, you forgot. That's not the rule. We're not allowed to marry the male converts. The female ones were not at fault. Them we can marry. To be continued next week as we see